Hey everyone! This video was partly inspired by Seb Alex's video titled Dear Human Rights Activists, We Need to Talk, which outlined the ways in which the animal agriculture industry exploits workers and harms humans. It's a great video to share with your non-vegan, social justice-oriented friends, so I'll link it below. He mentioned in the video that the points he was making were additional reasons to go vegan, and that the argument for animal rights is reason enough. So I wanted to expand on that and make the case for animal rights to human rights advocates who have yet to embrace veganism. I want to start out by saying that in discussing this concept of human supremacy, I'm not equating humans and non-human animals. The differences between humans and non-humans are greater than the differences between racial groups, genders, or sexual orientations. To argue for animal rights is not to argue that non-human animals should have all the same rights as humans. Animal rights advocates are pushing for basic rights for non-human animals, such as bodily autonomy and a healthy environment. But many things we consider to be basic human rights, like education, freedom of assembly, or the right to vote, don't apply to non-human animals. It wouldn't make sense to extend such rights to other species. I believe healthcare is a human right because we have the resources to provide healthcare for all people. In an ideal eco-socialist system, we could expand veterinary care, but we don't have the capacity to care for every sick or wounded animal in the wild. Given that we have limited resources, I think we are justified in prioritizing our own kin. In the same way we're justified in protecting our own and putting the needs of our family and friends before random strangers in dire circumstances. Non-human animals are significantly different from us in many regards, which is why I wouldn't equate humans and non-humans. And likewise, I wouldn't equate a dog with a fruit fly. The problem is that we're so focused on all of our differences that we fail to recognize our similarities. And it is precisely those similarities that makes it morally inconsistent for us to withhold basic rights like the freedom from exploitation from other animals. Animals used for food, clothing, research, and entertainment may have fur, feathers, fins, scales, tails, or hooves, unlike us, but like us, they have eyes to see, ears to hear, mouths to feed, and a brain and central nervous system to feel. Some animals we keep in captivity, such as elephants, whales, dolphins, and chimps, are highly intelligent and have a complex emotional range not much different from our own. But ultimately, to quote Jeremy Bentham, the question is not can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer? And the answer is a resounding yes to any creature with a brain and central nervous system. I understand that throughout history, marginalized people have been dehumanized compared to animals. So animal rights advocates are often cautioned against using terminology and imagery that compares the suffering of animals to the suffering of marginalized people. I recognize the importance of approaching this topic with caution, but I think ultimately this speaks to how pervasive speciesism is in our society. Take this excerpt from The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace Wells. I'm not about to personally slaughter a cow to eat a hamburger, but I'm also not about to go vegan. I tend to think when you're at the top of the food chain, it's okay to flaunt it, because I don't see anything complicated about drawing a moral boundary between us and other animals, and in fact, find it offensive to women and people of color that all of a sudden there's this talk of extending human rights-like legal protections to chimps, apes, and octopuses, just a generation or two after we finally broke the white male monopoly on legal personhood. Non-human animals are so devalued that the mere suggestion that they're worthy of respect and that their suffering is in many ways comparable to ours is considered deeply offensive. We have a tendency to rank suffering and oppression in ways that are unproductive. Think Western feminists raising awareness about social inequality. They're often told that women in the Middle East have it so much worse, so they should shut up and be grateful. We could play the game of would you rather and find that, of course, some suffering is measurably worse. But pointing to those who have it worse is a diversion tactic. It's dismissive and irrelevant. We should fight oppression wherever we see it, regardless of the perceived severity. This goes for the animal rights advocates who downplay the suffering of marginalized people in the West because the animals have it so much worse. And for human rights advocates who dismiss veganism because they perceive non-human animals to have a much lesser capacity to suffer, justifying their commodity status. When the concept of human rights was defended in the late 1700s, in Thomas Paine's Rights of Man and Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Women, Thomas Taylor wrote a satirical essay titled A Vindication of the Rights of Brutes, arguing that if we were to grant legal rights to men and women, we would have to grant rights to animals. His conclusion, though, was that the concept of animal rights is so absurd that the argument for human rights must be flawed. His conclusion is disturbing, but his reasoning is valid. Animal rights are the logical extension of human rights. This is demonstrated in Peter Singer's argument from marginal cases. Basically, if we're going to claim that humans are superior in value to non-human animals because of our superior cognitive abilities, we would have to accept that people on the margins who have limited cognitive abilities are inferior in value. If we're going to exclude non-human animals from our moral consideration on the basis of inferior intellect, we would have to exclude people with severe cognitive disabilities as well. In other words, speciesism is a form of ableism. Compassionate people feel that we have a moral duty to protect the most vulnerable members of our society, such as children, the elderly, and the disabled. It's a child's innocence that makes us especially horrified when harm is done to them. Human supremacy is represented in our disregard for the most vulnerable and innocent among us, non-human animals. Most people view humanity as separate from the animal kingdom, despite the fact that we undeniably belong to the animal kingdom. I acknowledged previously our relevant differences regarding specific rights, but our attitude of unquestionable superiority is unjustified. Our ego creates an illusion of separateness, and modern society reinforces this illusion of separateness. Anthropocentrism, the belief that human beings are the most important entity in the universe, interprets or regards the world in terms of human values and experiences. It is also referred to as human supremacy or human exceptionalism. Anthropocentrism is not simply prioritizing the needs of our own species. It's valuing other species only on the basis of how they can serve us. It is serving human interests at the expense of other species. This belief stems from religion. Man was created in the image of God and given dominion over all the other creatures. Only humans have souls. Charles Darwin shook things up when he released On the Origin of Species, because to accept the theory of evolution, you must accept that humans are animals, primates to be exact. We are Homo sapiens, a product of natural selection. By some metrics, we are superior to other species, but by other metrics, other species are superior to us. Dogs have a superior sense of smell, for example. Bats have a superior sense of direction. There are a few traits, opposable thumbs, among a few others, that gave us an evolutionary advantage over other species and set us on a trajectory to global domination. It's undeniable that we're exceedingly advanced compared to our fellow Earthlings. While it's true that we've built spectacular things, we've also destroyed spectacular things. Our impact on those we share this planet with has been a net negative. Ecologists have identified humans as a hyper-keystone species because of our influence on other keystone species. A keystone species defined as organisms that have outsized ecological impacts relative to their biomass. Bees, for example, are a keystone species because without them, entire ecosystems would collapse. Without humans, many ecosystems would recover. I say this all because as a species that prides ourselves for being extraordinary in all of these beautiful ways, we sure are extraordinary in destructive ways. It's amazing that we use the former as a justification to brutalize other beings, as if might makes right. Our brains are wired to empathize with creatures similar to us, so typically our empathy is strongest for other humans, then other primates, then other mammals. Though personally, and I'm sure others can relate, I value the life of my dog more than the life of Donald Trump. I feel more empathy and connection with a chicken than a corrupt demagogue. Generally speaking, humans may have greater moral value than non-humans, but not simply by virtue of being human. Individual Homo sapiens have greater moral value than individual prairie dogs, for example, because of our longer lifespans, richer emotional experience, and stronger social bonds. But if you zoom out and look at things through the lens of an ecologist, you could argue that prairie dogs as a whole have greater moral value than humans because of their role as a keystone species. It's reasonable to value individual human lives more than individual animal lives, but it's unreasonable to regard the human species as most important. It's reasonable to value the life of a human over the life of a fish, but it's unreasonable to value taste, pleasure, tradition, or convenience over the life of a fish. The ethical argument for veganism, of course, rests on the fact that it's unnecessary to exploit and kill animals for our survival and well-being. If it were necessary, we could fall back on the circle of life argument. Going back to my point earlier about how animal suffering is, in a lot of ways, comparable to ours, there are many valid comparisons between the oppression of humans and the oppression of non-human animals. Although comparisons are not equivalences, they are often interpreted as such. This doesn't mean we should shy away from making these comparisons, but that we should be explicit that we're not equating human lives with animal lives. Human supremacy is represented in the euphemisms we use to describe the horrific acts done to animals, and the refusal to call a spade a spade. I stand by the use of words like slavery, rape, and Holocaust to describe what we do to other species, because these are accurate descriptive terms. Orcas at SeaWorld, for example, are forced to perform tricks for entertainment, for profit. That is slavery. I recognize that in certain contexts, comparisons like these can be inflammatory and insensitive. Take this billboard, for example. In conversation or in an article, you can explain the nuance. On a billboard, you can't. The juxtaposition of these images conveys a message of equivalence. While I believe factory farming is a holocaust of epic proportions, I do not believe that Jews are equal to chickens. This was not a strategic move, in my opinion. Some people aren't ready to hear this message, and will react negatively and take offense, no matter how calmly and rationally you explain. But for others, a strong message, such as this, can be powerful and effective, because in confronting such a shocking truth, they're able to understand the gravity of the issue. To argue against the use of these terms in any context because of its potential to offend belittles the suffering of the animals. It puts them on a level so far below us that they're not worthy of nouns that describe exactly what is done to them. On the flip side, to use these terms in a descriptive and nuanced way in no way belittles the suffering of human victims. Elevating other sentient beings to a level of basic respect and honest terminology does not diminish the worth of human beings. Recognizing that non-human animals could be victims of sexual assault, slavery, and murder didn't lessen my empathy for other humans. It actually strengthened it. I became much more cognizant of human rights issues after I went vegan. Veganism gave me the foundation to align my actions with my values in other areas, and I committed to boycotting the fast fashion industry. In conclusion, racism, sexism, heterosexism, and speciesism are different manifestations of the same evil: discrimination based on arbitrary characteristics. To be consistent, in your fight for human liberation, You must embrace the movement for animal liberation and go vegan. It truly is one struggle, one fight. Thank you so much for watching. Give this video a thumbs up. Let me know what you think down below, and please share it. I want people to see this. All right, peace out.
Yo, how when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me tell them say me no eat no fish, nah, no meat now. How when me eat them, I wonder when me yam. When me tell them say that I'm a vegan man. How when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me